the last few weeks, I decided to invest into my Steam catalog. I have to say that buying games simply hasn't been easy, especially when it concerns AAA games. To say it simply, avoid most modern releases like the plague and focus on AA or indie releases. Now that's about as far as you can make it without the entire video becoming complicated. Gentle souls, turn back now. Let's just say that the AAA industry is very anti-consumer. You just have to take a look at Capcom and the debacle around Street Fighter Cross Tekken when they had DLC content available on disc, but you had to pay to unlock them. This or any pre-release DLC. There's a lot of content lost to gamers simply because it wasn't pre-purchased. Now on top of that, the industry is also very politically correct, and I admit to letting my guard down. Everything started when I bought Dishonored 1 and 2 on Steam. A special sales. Why not? I made sure the games were DRM free. I do not like DRM like most people, being spied on or having performance issues under the pretense that's to make the game more friendly or to push away people who pirate games doesn't work with me. After buying both games, I remembered something. The second one sold poorly and they probably won't make a sequel, but why? That's when I reopened the rabbit hole that I had forgotten about because I had no interest for it at the time. To say it simply, Dishonored 2 was a woke game. There's your answer. I really believe that bringing attention to certain things or person makes them stronger, so I will only mention her nickname. Scamesian was a consultant on the second. Why in the name of God would she be anything more than just an ill-revived memory is beyond me. That's what happens when your industry is populated by soft people who bend easily. Not only did her simple presence hurt the game, but significant changes were made on her request. More female soldiers were added, and most significantly, you could play a woman now, Emily. You would think that was enough, but she still complained that there was a playable male character. You would also think that being in league with the Scamesian would completely kill that company, but no. They're somewhat still relevant despite the fact that they still hold the same kind of value. The only difference is that they have slightly changed their tactics. Their previous endeavor is what I call woke or explicit woke. For as terrible as those things sound, at least you can see them coming from a mile away. The issue with this mindset is that it completely forgets that people, whether male or female, have different interests in life and different skills based on urology and physicality. There's not a lot of female soldiers because it's dangerous and demands a physical presence. So the idea that comes from some form of oppression doesn't work. Furthermore, this idea that there should have only been a female character just means that you want to do what you accused others of doing, creating a space where only a group is presented out of hatred. Having Emily as a playable character in and of itself isn't bad. Again, this is not the worst, you can see the writing on the wall. What you should fear is a phenomenon I call light woke. I penned the name for this phenomenon when I realized a pattern in modern media. Certain media have a pattern of starting as perfectly adequate. However, certain things stand out that correspond to the politically correct ideology. Certain groups will suddenly be numerous and overrepresented. A perfect example would be the game Control and its overabundance of female characters that are present as soldiers, women being in positions of power, having a female protagonist, or in the case of other media, having a lot of handicapped characters, or very specifically, having gingers being replaced with black people. You will find many more examples that build over time until at the end of the work in question, or in its sequel, they become overt with these elements. Dishonored 2 was an obvious one, and they dialed it back with Prey and Deathloop. At that point, it's not that taboo to talk about it, at least with the average person. What's more complicated is talking about it beforehand. If you say that you don't want to see X people in X domain, people will wonder if you have any bias towards them. In this particular scenario, if you know anything about psychology and biology, you know that women are not suited for combat roles. They have a higher aversion to danger and are physically smaller in average. The issue is that by consistently presenting certain scenarios and treating them as an accurate portrayal of reality, people start to believe it. How many times do we have to say to children to not imitate things on television? You know that you're not Superman because he's an alien. However, if you started professing that there needs to be more Kryptonians in fiction, and that the average man can fly, people would think you're insane. Fiction is still based upon reality, and if something is not representative of our reality, you need to establish how it can deviate and present new rules. A man flying is insane, so you say that he's an alien. Proposing certain scenarios, like more women in active combat roles, is dangerous, and they might realize too late that most of them are not suited for such roles. It doesn't limit itself to women, but it's just a good example. Control, in its very ending, proposes that old men in power is passé, and that women should be in charge. Again, having someone in a role just for the sake of it is ill-fitting. Certain groups might not have the skills or interests for certain tasks. They're human beings. You can't interchangeably put them in roles. Having a woman as a protagonist in itself is not an issue. It's just that after a certain amount of really unlikely scenarios or overrepresentation, you understand that those elements are just breeding ground to make you accept more extreme ideas. That's where you end up with Battlefield and ginger handicapped female soldier in World War I. That's the very issue with light woke. Unlike its more overt counterpart, you have to get invested in terms of time or money before realizing that your investment was a mistake. There were warnings, I was in alert mode, but it's still not until playing a third time that I stumbled upon that optional line in the post-game. Or Asylum.
To stop the hiss, right? Sounds like she...
Finally, someone had the balls to take the fight to them. It's about time we had someone other than an old man at the helm.
Which brings me to another point. Nobody likes that kind of thing. When it's overt, like The Last of Us 2, people will flee before they have time to be disappointed. To push on their ideas, they have to be disingenuous and hide them. The ones in charge of the specific media you're consuming have to hide their ideas until the very end or sequel. Make sure you're hooked because such ideas are dreadful. The fact that 505 Games barred male streamers from playing Control in its first days to give more place to their female counterparts sounds awfully hypocritical. Now, I don't like ignoring the negative, but I refuse also to dwell on it, so I shall propose a series of games that are worth your time. Katana Zero is a simple side-scrolling action game where your patience is tested against increasingly difficult odds. It's in the same vein as Hotline Miami 1 and 2. Bizarre and transient. While we're at it, why not suggest Hotline Miami 1 and 2? They're a suitable challenge and generate the right amount of frustration. Metal Wolf Chaos is a game that gained some traction a couple of years back because of the now defunct group Two Best Friends play. Somehow that surge in popularity created the necessary environment for Devolver Studio to finally port the strangely Xbox Japan exclusive to the West. It is the most nonsensical of the bunch yet. It is well researched and unfortunately its themes are still relevant today. Blasphemous is a Metroidvania Souls-like. Yes, another one of those. Don't get discouraged, it's actually pretty entertaining, mechanically wise. But what really makes it stand out is the heavy Spanish Christian imagery and the super detailed 2D art. The art is very reminiscent of early DOS games. It's very similar to the rotoscope cutscenes of Another World and Prince of Persia. Buying games in this current market can seem like a complicated task, with all the anti-consumer features such as DLC, DRM, and the heavy presence of politics. So I hope that these pointers were enough. Focus on middle market or indie games and be very wary of mainstream releases.
I was one of some voices that were very critical of Dishonored 1.
Right.
While it was a really impressive game, it wasn't so good to women. And so it was such a treat to see Dishonored 2 come out. And, you know, you can play as Emily, the marketing was Emily, it was just this big push, and it was very clear that there was at least some conversation that happened internally around that. I'm assuming that that was an intentional choice.
Yeah, I mean, I want to answer the question, but I always feel like, even though it's very basic for you, for other people that may be listening, I always want to answer the question like, because some game developers are like, I hate critics. Come try to make a game and then criticize the game.
Wait, they don't like critics?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before. Yeah.
And so I always say, I love critics, because in part, besides video games, I also come from like a literary background, and I've always just felt like reading the book and then reading the criticism, then reading the book again is the ultimate way to experience something. Same with film, and it should be true for video games too. You know, everybody loves Lester Bangs, you know, of a certain generation. It's like, here's a person that will tell you how to appreciate more a thing you already love, and also cite the problems with it. So I love critics. I love that kind of stuff. We internally sat down. Well, your comment, which I will always remember, I'll take it to my grave, is
well, I don't even know if
something
I
like,
remember it.
I'm going to get it wrong too now, watch. And everybody online will be like, aha, idiot. But it was something like, while Dishonored is a game that does many things very well, the roles that it has for women are very narrow. And, you know, at first you take some criticism and you're like, wait a minute. And then you go look and it's like, wow, every woman in Dishonored 1 is either a servant, a prostitute, a witch, a queen, or a little girl. I think
or
maybe
dead.
or
Or killed.
Or killed,
yeah. Right.